One of the big buyers of Minnesota soybeans is not paying up this year. In fact, China isn't buying any of the crop grown in the U.S. right now.
The shutdown is also delaying a possible federal bailout for soybean farmers. They lost China as their biggest buyer due to President Trump's trade tariffs.
KCCI senior reporter Todd Magel shows us how farmers are now struggling to find storage because they don't want to sell their fall harvest for low prices.
Africa has just made a move that blindsided Washington, and U.S. farmers are already feeling the shock. For years, America dominated the global soybean market, supplying China with millions of tons of grain and earning billions of dollars in the process. But everything changed the moment Africa stepped in with new soybean deals that China quickly embraced. Overnight, a market the U.S. thought it controlled began slipping away, and American farmers are calling it a devastating blow. Across the Midwest, farmers are watching their long-standing export routes crumble as China shifts its demand toward Africa's growing soybean production. At the same time, African nations are celebrating a breakthrough, finally becoming major players in a trade once controlled by global superpowers. What looked impossible just a few years ago is now happening in real time. Africa is rising, China is repositioning, and America is suddenly being pushed out of the equation. This shift isn't just about soybeans, it's about power, influence, and the future of global agriculture. Why is China betting big on Africa? Why are U.S. farmers warning that this could be the biggest market loss in decades? And how did Africa manage to take one of America's most profitable export industries and turn it into a new opportunity for itself? The answers reveal a dramatic change in global trade that the U.S. never expected, and may not be able to stop. Africa's new soybean deals with China have triggered one of the most unexpected shifts in global agriculture, reshaping trade routes that Washington once believed were unshakable. For decades, the United States stood as China's #1 soybean supplier. Billions of dollars flowed every year from American farms into Chinese markets. It was a relationship so large, so stable, and so deeply interwoven that many believed nothing, not politics, not policy, not competition, could truly threaten it. But the world has entered a new era, and Africa has just stepped onto the field with a game-changing move that few saw coming. Across the American Midwest, the shock is real. Farmers who have planted soybeans their entire lives, families whose livelihoods depend on exports to China, are now facing a painful truth. The global market has shifted beneath their feet. China is quietly but rapidly redirecting massive portions of its soybean imports to Africa, a continent that is emerging not just as a backup supplier, but as a rising agricultural powerhouse with the potential to replace the United States altogether in key areas of the trade. To understand how this happened, you have to understand China's strategy. For years, China sought ways to reduce its dependency on American soybeans, especially after the U.S.-China trade war. Tariffs, political tension, and unpredictable diplomacy pushed China to look elsewhere for stable long-term partners. South America filled some of that demand, but even that wasn't enough. China needed more land, more growth potential, and more political stability in its supply chain. And that's where Africa stepped in quietly, patiently, and strategically. From Zambia to Nigeria to Mozambique, African nations have been expanding soybean production at a pace that feels almost impossible. Many of these countries have millions of hectares of fertile, untapped farmland. When China offered investments, machinery, infrastructure, and guaranteed purchase agreements, African governments saw an opportunity that could transform their economies. China wasn't just buying soybeans, it was building roads, funding irrigation, opening processing plants, and training local farmers. The deals weren't simply transactions, they were long-term partnerships designed to last decades. Meanwhile, American farmers watched these developments with increasing concern. Every year, reports showed Africa's production rising. Every year, Chinese buyers purchased more African soybeans. Every year, U.S. farmers lost a growing share of the market. What began as a small shift has now turned into a major realignment. And it's not just a temporary trend, it's becoming permanent. In states like Iowa, Illinois, Nebraska, and Minnesota, where soybean farming is a way of life, the impact is already visible. Prices that once depended on strong Chinese demand are now slipping. Storage silos are filling up, and many farmers are being forced to sell at lower margins. Some are questioning whether the system they relied on is slipping away for good. The frustration is growing because farmers feel blindsided. For decades, they were told China was their most important customer. They were told the U.S.-China agricultural relationship was too big to fail. But now, with every new African-China trade deal, that confidence is evaporating, and China's motivations are clear. Africa offers something that neither the United States nor South America can guarantee: long-term expansion. Africa has land, vast, rich land, just beginning to be cultivated at industrial scale. China sees a future where Africa becomes not just a supplier, but a dominant agricultural region capable of feeding its massive population. By building partnerships early, China positions itself as Africa's preferred buyer for decades to come. For African nations, the opportunity is enormous. Soybean farming is transforming rural communities. Farmers who once struggled with low market access are now growing crops that fetch higher prices internationally. New processing facilities mean soybeans can be turned into meal and oil locally, boosting jobs and adding value before export. Ports are expanding, rail lines are being upgraded, and farming cooperatives are emerging too. Unify small growers into bigger, more competitive forces. African governments are celebrating because these deals represent economic sovereignty and a new path toward global relevance. But for the United States, this is more than just a trade loss. It's a warning signal. American farmers are not just losing sales, they are losing influence. The U.S. agricultural economy is deeply connected to its global export relationships. When a major market shifts, the ripple effects touch everything: farm income, rural economies, processing industries, transport networks, and even bank credit systems. When China redirects billions in soybean purchases, it leaves a gap the U.S. can't quickly replace. And politics are only making things worse. Trade tensions, tariffs, and unpredictable policies are driving China further away. Instead of repairing the relationship, Washington has been focusing on geopolitical competition, technology restrictions, and sanctions. Meanwhile, China quietly strengthens its agricultural alliances elsewhere, especially in Africa, where U.S. influence has been fading. The impact is also psychological. American farmers who survived droughts, floods, storms, and economic downturns now face something different: global replacement. They aren't losing crops to nature, they are losing markets to new competitors. And for many, that reality is painful. In interviews across American farming towns, you hear the same concerns repeated. China was our biggest buyer. We can't afford to lose this. Africa wasn't even on the radar 10 years ago. There's frustration because farmers feel like they're refighting a problem they didn't create and cannot control. And while U.S. farmers struggle, Africa's agricultural rise is inspiring hope across the continent. In Zambia, soybean fields are expanding every season. In Nigeria, investment in processing plants is creating thousands of new jobs. In Ethiopia, farmers who once grew low-profit crops are switching to soybeans with higher international demand. Across East and West Africa, training programs and mechanization are boosting productivity at levels that were unimaginable just a decade ago. These changes are not just economic, they are symbolic. Africa, long seen as a consumer in the global food system, is now becoming a supplier. The continent is moving from dependency to production, from import reliance to export growth, and China is accelerating that transition every step of the way. The United States now finds itself in a position it hasn't experienced in generations, being replaced in a market it once dominated. And the question many are asking is, can the U.S. do anything about it? To compete, America would need to repair trade relationships, rebuild trust, and create predictable agricultural policies. But even then, the structural advantage Africa now holds isn't going away. Africa's land is cheaper, its labor is younger, and China is investing billions in infrastructure. What started as a small shift is becoming a long-term strategy, and Washington is only just beginning to grasp how much ground it has lost. Some analysts warn that this moment should be a wake-up call. If the U.S. doesn't adapt, it won't just lose soybean markets, it could lose corn, wheat, sorghum, and other agricultural exports as African production scales up. What we're seeing today with soybeans may be the beginning of a much larger pattern. For China, the strategy is simple: diversify suppliers, reduce dependence on the U.S., and build long-term partnerships with regions that offer growth potential. For Africa, the strategy is equally clear: use foreign investment to accelerate development, boost exports, and strengthen national economies. For the United States, however, the path forward is uncertain. The agricultural world is changing faster than many policymakers expected. The rules of global competition have shifted, and the market that once belonged to American farmers is now slipping away. In the end, this isn't just a story about soybeans. It's a story about global power, economic transformation, and the rise of new players on the world stage. Africa has made its move. China has doubled down, and American farmers are now facing the consequences of a world where old assumptions no longer hold true. The question is no longer whether Africa can become a global agricultural powerhouse. The question is how long it will take and how far the United States will fall behind before it realizes what has already begun.